let's talk about moving objects in Houdini. These are just some of the few things that I have observed and learned working with modeling. So let's put down a geo mode and let's say this default. So on object level, you can see that there are these with these geometry nodes, the pivots. When you press enter, you can see that there are pivot right at the center of the world. So when we are working with the object level nodes, we are working in a world grid. So this grid can be infinite, but the center always going to be at the zero, at the default. Let's duplicate it and make it like, call it moved, and let's move it -1, just so we can see what's the difference. So when we go inside the default node, you can see that nothing changes. So let's put down a box. So now whenever we create these primitives, it's going to be at the center of the geometry handle, so right here. But when we go to the moved, you can see something changing. So in the moved, you can see that actually now we're working with the local grid, and you can see that actually the zero position changes. So I'm gonna go back. So this is the volt 0, and now we have moved this handle at the -1, and I go inside. The actual grid has repositioned it to the, so the origin starts right at the pivot. And if I'm gonna create box, you can see that it's actually creates zero. It creates the box at the 0 in a local, and also but at the -1 in a world, because we moved this pivot. So this is one of the things that it's not very clear when you start working with it. Actually, I didn't even notice that there are actually two grids when you go inside here or here, inside geo or object level. It is easy to break the pivot center when modeling. So what we have here in this example, it is just the basic box and it is just in center. But let's say we have modeled this object, and obviously it's not in the center. So let's say we want to rotate it right at the center. It's going to be pretty hard for us to just find where it is. So in this setup, what you can do, so we have gone inside, and you can see that again this pivot is here at the 0. So what you can do is just, what I like to do is just to put down a match size, because this is a procedural way, because we can also put down a transform, but you actually have to press on it every time when you want to move it. So if you do anything in here, maybe something like another, I don't know, so I make like this and move this, you can see that with the transform node you actually have to press it again to move it to the center. So if you just want to center it at the pivot, just put down a match size and then just display it, and it's automatically going to create. Actually, we can just look at how it's done right now. I'm just going to select this and bevel it, extrude it, as you can see. So I'm gonna put it before the match size. I want to display match size and go to the poly extrude, and you can see that it's actually changed on the bed both ways, and it selects the center of the whole object. So match size is very useful node in that way. So now after the match size is done, go back, you can see it's right at the center. We can move it, and that is the best place where you want your pivot, because for the most part, because you can easily move it and rotate it again. And of course you can just basically, let's say we don't want this object right here, just move it anywhere or even rotate it. Say it's part of the more complex object, it's going to be in here, and I go to the move back in, you can see that it's our pivot that we just moved in here is right at the center of our local axis. And we can easily model it inside here on a flat surface. And after that, this object is part of the bigger scene, and it's in here. And also, when you move between these two, the rotation can get a little bit weird. So what I like to do is just, let's say I go inside here, and to flatten out the view, I just press space and G. It's basically going to reorient the camera to the grid. So because we do have different grids because we moved this pivot. So whenever we go back, just press space and G, and now we're flat on the grid. We can move it around, and we are going here. Just press space G again, and now we are flat against the local grid. When we keep modeling, chances are we want to move objects more than just around its center pivot. So with that, you can right click on a translate handle and click on attachment to geometry, and with that you can see that we have detached our handle and we can move it anywhere. I'm gonna turn on snapping, maybe grid snapping, snap it here, and then just attach back to the geometry, and now we can move it around, and this is not affecting the local. This moving of this handle with detached handle is not actually affecting the local axis, so you can see that it's actually still at the zero. And whenever you want to center back to the pivot center, you can just go to the right click it and snap to centroid, like that. There is also option to snap to pivot, but the pivot is actually at the same place where the centroid is, so we can change the pivot's location actually with W, E and R buttons, which is these two. So this is going to be considered as our pivot, and you can change the location of it just by clicking it and go to the pivot mode. It's basically the same mode as a handle. You can move it around to another place. Generally speaking, you do not want to move your pivot around because it is the best idea to keep it at the center and just move around the handle to do your transformation at object level. So I'm just gonna exit the pivot mode, go back to the translate handle, and if I go back to this and to snap to the pivot, you can see it moved to the place where our pivot was. One last thing I wanted to talk about is the orientation picking, which is definitely one of the most used actions when you're trying to position objects to others. So you go to the line translate and start orientation picking. Of course, you can all of these put the hotkeys down, so you don't have to go to the menus. So once you're inside this, you will get this weird kind of pivot. First of all, you can choose the primary axis, which is just with the control, and click on this X, Y, or Z. So let's say I want to orient it so the top of it, so this is the top. So I just press the Y axis and press on the vertex. As you can see, it has moved. You can just rotate it. So what else we can do with this? It did move, so what if we do not want for it to move? So you can go to the pivot mode again, and you can control click on this place. So basically going to move it, but not going to rotate it. If you rotate it, if you do it, so it's going to rotate. So by holding down the control, it's not going to rotate it, just move it on that axis. And you can see that if we change to the x-axis, we click on it, you can see that x now is facing up to the vertex normal. So the same with the normals for the polygons. Another option in orientation picking is to align the object along the normal of this of any surface you click on. So you can see that our primary is y-axis. So I go into orientation picking, shift click on any of these normals, and you can see that it's oriented itself to that axis. It doesn't move any objects, it just moves the axis. So that can be useful. And the last option is to make orientation picking face the primary axis. So I go in orientation picking and control shift on any face. You can see that it makes primary axis to face that polygon or vertex or edge. So that could be useful when you're bridging something together, so that they face together, so you can make a bridge operation. So in this tutorial I just wanted to give some brief overview. This is not even close to all of it, but I think with this information you can go further and research more about object and geometry level orientation to understand even more about it, because it is very much different than any other 3D package that I have personally used. So see you next time.